Now let's go through this engine performance 2 test 1 thing. We got a few of these to go. Won't take very long. Technician A says the first step in the diagnostic process is to verify the problem. Technician B says the second step is to perform a thorough visual inspection. Who's correct about that? Both of them. Basically, you're going to try to find out if you can get it to do it. Now, if somebody says, my vehicle is skipping, or it runs bad. Now, you remember when you started, Adam, when you started working on the Navigator?
Yes.
You were driving it around and you were feeling this horrible way it felt. You were duplicating the concern right there. And the next thing we basically did is we looked to see what we could find wrong. I actually unplugged the cam sensor on the passenger side bank to see if it changed the way it ran, but it didn't. And we determined by doing our visual inspection that the cam shaft on the passenger side bank was out of time. We pulled it. Yeah, we actually pulled a bunch of junk off of it, which would be the radiator shroud, all that stuff. Of course, and he's got to get the valve covers off and all that. It's going to be a bear, but he can do it. Which item is not important to know before starting the diagnosis of an engine performance problem? Brand of engine oil is not particularly, I mean, the brand is not a big deal. If whatever they use is going to be fine, right? We were talking about fuel trims. Let me tell you a short story. Really important that you understand this, because this right here will smack you around if you're not familiar with it. My dad was working on my mom's 91 Chrysler. He told me, he says, the engine light came on, the power loss light, you know, whatever. And I said, turn the key on and count the flashes. He goes, you know, my dad was a mechanic for 30 years, but you know, it was all grease and steel with him and all this, and he was good at what he did, but he don't care nothing about pulling codes. And I said, okay, I'll come over and do it. So I turned the key on. I got a code 17 on that old car, and that means it needs a thermostat. Fairly simple. Running too cold. It's like a PO128 on one of our cars today. And so he said, well, I can put a thermostat in it. So he puts the thermostat in it, got it all burped out and everything's fine. Drives it around a couple of days. Then he goes over to his shop. He had his little shop still over by the sawmill. He pulled it in there. He said, I think I need to do an oil change on it. So he got oil in the filter. He changed the oil. He calls me up again. He goes, I changed the oil. I back it out of the shop, and now it won't idle. Seriously? He said, yeah. He said, all I did was change the oil, and now it won't idle. And he said, I crank it up, it goes dead. I crank it up, it goes dead. I can keep it alive with my foot, but it goes dead. And I said, okay, do this. I said, take the battery cable off for about 10 minutes, and then put it back on and see what it does then. And so he took the battery cable off for 10 minutes, and he put it back on, and he cranked it up and ran just fine. Now, how did I know what to tell him? And why did that fix that car? It was running too cold. Think about this. You got to back up now. It was running too cold. When it runs cold on a fuel-injected engine, it runs rich, right? Got me? If it's running too rich for too long a period of time, you got blow-by going by the rings, and there's inevitably, in spite of your PCV system, there's going to be gasoline deposited in the engine oil, right? You get enough gasoline in the engine oil, the PCV valve is pulling it through, and it's richening the mixture, and the powertrain control module is subtracting fuel to the nth degree to try to balance the air-fuel system. Okay, so now you've got really, really, really negative fuel trim numbers, but that's okay because there's plenty of gas coming out of the oil to keep it all balanced. Now he's putting new motor oil in it that's not contaminated with gasoline, and it's like having a carburetor that's out of adjustment.
The battery for a while, it resets.
Yeah, forgets everything that it learned. Got me? That's not complicated. I mean, but all I was thinking was he didn't do anything except remove that fuel contaminated engine oil. See? I mean, you see how simple it is to figure out a problem? And I have seen some of them that were running really bad and had engine lights and all this kind of stuff. All you had to do was change your oil. You know, so it's a good idea to check, to think about if you're seeing fuel trim numbers that are actually going negative because there's too much fuel. If you can find the PCV valve and pull the PCV valve out and stop it up with paper, you know, it's going to have stop it up with paper so it's not pulling air in there, and just let it run without PCV working and see if those fuel trim numbers begin to correct. If they do, change the oil before you do anything else. Remember, that's what we did on that Buick. I mean, it needed an oil change, but that didn't fix the other problem. We had to do other things. But just remember that. That's a story. I won't charge you anything extra for that story. A paper test can be used to check for a possible problem with what? Faulty injector, ignition system, burn valve, all of the above. All of them. Now, what does that mean? A paper test is, listen to this, fellas. When you hold the paper test, a dollar bill or a piece of paper at the exhaust pipe, if it's going pop, 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 you're basically got a misfiring cylinder. If the exhaust valve's burned, when the piston goes down, if the exhaust valve's not closing or whatever, then it has to try to suck that paper back in too, isn't it? Now, if I hear a puff, 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 I'm going to identify the cylinder first. First thing I'm going to do is throw a spark plug in it, and possibly a coil if it's a coil-on plug. See if that takes care of it. Now, you know the puff, 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 the missing that Lincoln was doing was happening because the spark plug hole was full of coolant, right? Now, where'd the coolant come from? Leaking intake manifold gasket. Not the gasket, leaking intake manifold where that heater hose comes out. That little fitting that you saw in that manifold cannot be screwed out of there and another one screwed in. It's actually swedged in there. If you take it out, you'll never make it stop leaking again. So that's why we've got to put an intake manifold on that one. The point is, we found an engine skip. We verified the engine skip. We found the water in the hole. We blew the water out of the hole. We pulled a spark plug out. It didn't look that bad. But basically, the water was actually creating a path for the spark, and that's why it wasn't firing a plug. And so this particular cause for this was the intake manifold was the cause. So think about condition, cause, correction. Condition is an engine skip. Cause is water in the spark plug hole. Correction is replace the intake manifold. Got me? That's condition, cause, correction. You're going to think like that, how you're supposed to do that. Which steps should be performed last when diagnosing an engine performance problem? Think about it. Read the answers. Somebody speak out. What should you do last?
I guess verifying the repair.
That's a good answer. Verify the repair. But every time if you work anywhere where there's a service advisor talking to a customer, the service advisor wants to be the knight in shining armor and the hero. And so the service advisor, when you tell them you're going to have $325 worth of work, because I've determined that this is bad and that's bad and this is bad, right? And then the guy says, the service writer is going to say, and that's going to fix it, right? And what you have to say is, I know this stuff is bad, but I won't know if it's going to be fixed or not until I verify the repair. That's why the shop manual says verify the repair. And if I look at it and there's still something wrong that we didn't see because the other was covering it up, we may need more work. But we know this work needs to be done. You understand what I'm saying? So you tell them this work needs to be done, but I cannot guarantee you that this is going to fix it until I have verified the repair. And every shop manual on the planet says verify the repair. It's just what you got to do, That's important for you, just like it is for anybody else, because a lot of times we want to think, okay, I'm going to throw a set of plugs in this and then we'll be done. Well, not until you verify the repair, you're not, because there may be other problems. That's the point. Okay. One time there was this Thunderbird that had never had the hood open on it except for oil changes, I guess, came in there when I was working at the Ford place. And so they says they wanted to just find out why this engine was stalling. I found 4 reasons why that could make an engine stall. It had a bad EVP sensor. It had a bad idle tracking switch in the idle speed control motor. It had a throttle position sensor that was bouncing around. And there was something else, I can't remember. Well, when I priced out all that stuff, and the car had 140,000 miles on it, it was going to be like $500 worth of parts and labor. And so the salesman, he's a big old guy, looks like a wrestler. He came out there and he goes, why the people were down at the mall, they hadn't heard the estimate yet, and he came out there and he goes, it seems to me like you should be able to just put one of those parts on that car and fix it. These were really good customers of mine, and I don't want them to get upset. They bought 5 cars from me. And I said, well, you've made a lot of money off selling them cars. Maybe you want to help them with their bill. And he went, this ain't funny. I got kind of tickled. Anyway, when they came back up there, they said, go ahead and fix it. Now, what would have been the problem with putting just one of the parts on there? It stalls again. They say, you didn't fix it and I want my next repair for free. You got me? So you fix everything you see. I knew how, I could check it all on that one without one part covering up another. I knew the voltage was off here. I knew this switch had too much resistance, and I knew the throttle position sensor was dropping out, and whatever the fourth part was. I don't remember what it was. But anyway, they didn't mind it. They just said, go ahead and fix it, and I fixed it, and the car was fine. They were happy. But he was wanting me to, tweak the thing where it wouldn't, protect yourself and the customer too. Okay, let me see. Technician A says, if the opposite diagnostic trouble code can be set, the problem is the component itself. Technician B says that if the opposite diagnostic trouble code cannot be set, the problem was with the wire and the ground. Now, what Sam Hill are they talking about there?
I was going to ask you, what does he mean by the opposite?
Here we go. All right, let's just go back to 2-digit codes because it's a little easier to remember them and write them down. All right, if my throttle position sensor has got 3 wires going to it, right? Okay, my throttle position sensor has got, what's this top one is VREF. This one here is a signal, and this is signal return. Okay, now what happens is, as the engine controller is reading this, it's expecting to see something like from, I'm going to say 0.8, it could be half a volt on a GM car, about a volt on a Ford, and up to 4.6. All right, if it goes above the window, it's going to be what you would call, it's going to throw a 53 if it goes above that window. If it's reading 5 volts all the time, no matter what you're doing with your throttle, the engine controller is looking at map sensor, and it can tell you're moving the throttle, right? Okay, that's a 53. Okay, so I've got a 53, and that's telling me this signal line is basically got too much voltage on it, more than the thing wants to see. It's outside the window, right? Okay, so what we're going to do here, we're going to take the throttle position sensor out of the circuit. All right, and what we're going to do here is we're going to take this signal and we're going to jump it right there. All right, below the window that it'll accept is a 63. Hear me? So if I jump that and I run the test again, and now I get a code 63, what do I know? I know the sensor's my problem. Got it? However, what if I jump it and the code stays up?
This is the wire.
It's going to be this one, or it's going to be a short between this one and that one. Hear me? Typically it'll be that one. Now, if the signal return wire is cut, this is going to read 5 volts all the time. And I've seen that. I've seen the signal return wire get fouled up inside the engine controller, and every sensor was reading 5 volts. When you don't see a ground on the signal return wire, but you do see 5 volts here and you see 5 volts there, suspect this. If a bunch of them are reading 5 volts, you got wiring problem. But that's what they're talking about. See what I mean? What if you're getting a 63 though? But what if you were getting a 63? What you're going to do then, watch this, you're going to jump this to here, and you're going to try to create a 53. Hear me? Now, if you've got one that's saying that the voltage is too low, and you manage to jump your reference voltage into your signal wire and get a 53, now you've actually done some troubleshooting that's indicated their sensor's bad too. But if you jump it and you don't get the opposite code, then basically what you got there is you got a problem right here, or you got a problem right there. That's where I was going on that. Now that's not too complicated. If you get out there and you get it playing around, you'll figure it out. It's not a big deal on that. All right. Incidentally, I need somebody today, and I may need to give you some pointers to wire that board right there up with some jumper wires I have, because I think I'm gonna get a handle to put on top of that board where I can carry it, and I'm gonna take it with me over there to the Kiwanis Center tomorrow. But anyway, we'll talk about that later. Let me see. So everybody understands that right now, right? You got a C. The preferred method to clear diagnostic trouble codes is to do what?
Use a scan tool.
Use a scan tool. Typically, a lot of people will take the battery cable off. I don't like that. Sometimes people would come to have their car worked on. They said, I had a code, and they say, I took the battery cable off and I cleared it, and so I need you to check my car. Well, if the code hasn't reset for some reason or another and it's not showing up as a pending code, then they've just shot themselves in the foot because you don't know yet what's going on. You look at the data stream, see if you can see something. You won't always. Which is the factory scan tool for Chrysler brand vehicles equipped with CAN? And that one, you wouldn't have any way of knowing that unless you read the chapter. It says Star Scan. That's the one that looks a lot like the Star Scan, looks a lot like our this little Autel scan tool we got here, the little touchscreen one. It looks a lot like that, and it's a touchscreen about the same size. But it's the one I was talking about that throws you the picture of the network up there. You touch the module on the map, and it pulls that module up. It's cool as all get out. Expensive, too. But it's specifically Chrysler, okay? Technician A says reprogramming a PCM using the J2534 system requires a factory scan tool. That's not true. I can do that without a factory scan tool, and I got a tool out here for it. Technician B says reprogramming a PCM using the J2534 system requires internet access. That is correct. You have to have internet access to be able to pull that calibration down. You've also got to pay a subscription to the manufacturer. Technician A says knowing whether there are any stored diagnostic trouble codes may be helpful when checking for related technical service bulletins. Well, I'd say that's true, wouldn't you? Technician B says only a factory scan tool should be used to retrieve diagnostic trouble codes. That's hogwash. You can use any scan tool to retrieve diagnostic trouble codes. It helps if you can look in both rooms. Let me say this while I'm thinking about it, y'all. Look here. And this is something that I didn't even know when I was working in the dealership. But you learn about it, in independent training schools. Here's your engine controller. And I'm just basically drawing this figuratively. There's two rooms in there. There's an OBD2 room, which is the generic codes, like I was talking about, that are the PO whatever. And then there's the enhanced room. How do you spell enhanced? E-N-H-A-N. I'm just going to put enhanced. All right, enhanced room, OBD room. Why is that important? Because in the OBD2 room, if you've got a sensor that the wire's been cut to it, like an intake air temperature, engine coolant temperature sensor, this one here on that sensor, if it's been unplugged or the wire's been cut, it's going to read -40. Over in the enhanced room, those smart algorithm tappers said, well, if we have a problem, we want to be able to have the thing to operate as smoothly as possible, even though we've lost a sensor. So we're going to substitute a value that we think will probably work. And so they put like 101 degrees in there as a default setting if it loses this. You do the same car, same computer, same scan tool. You look at OBD2, you'll see -40. You look over here, you'll see some value it substituted, like 101 degrees or whatever. Yeah, if this one here is not telling you the truth, you may be confused when you look at that, particularly if it's a truthful reading, if it happens to line up with reality. So it's a good idea to look in both rooms. So go in OBD2, look in there, go in your enhanced room, look in there, see what they both show you on the same sensor, because you're looking for a problem, a P0118 code or whatever, for that particular sensor. You can also do this. Switch the car off, leave it sitting there all night long if you think you got a temperature sensor issue. Pull up your scan tool the next morning, plug it in, look at all your temperature sensors while it's still sitting there before you ever started the car. They should all, because of the second law of thermodynamics, they should all be really close, right? Within a degree or two of each other. Transmission oil temperature, intake air temperature, engine coolant temperature should be very close to the same reading if it's been sitting for 4 or 5 hours and nobody started. When you start it, the numbers go crazy. But when it's been sitting there, everything's going to be about the same temperature. Slight difference if it's sitting out in the hot sun, and it, you know what I'm saying. But if it's sitting there, that's one way you can do that. This is common sense stuff. All right, let's keep going. Are we having fun yet? All right. Which method can be used to reprogram a PCM? All of the above: offboard, direct, and remote. Which steps should be performed when first diagnosing an engine performance problem? Incidentally, when you reprogram a PCM, you're basically just plugging into the data stream. It juices the EEPROM up with 18 volts and erases the program. You got the calibration file that you've downloaded, and it puts it in there, and all you're doing is watching a progress bar. You don't get to type in numbers and pick your values. It's actually going to just go across there. When it's done, you say, okay, now switch it off and back on, and you've got it programmed. I can do that, when I got to get the subscription renewed for my IDS unit. I can show you guys what it feels like to do that and how it works and all that. So I can actually do it with that other thing I got too. All right. And you'd be surprised if you have to replace an instrument cluster on like a 2004 Chevrolet pickup, you better be able to flash program, because you're going to have to program that thing. All right, let's go. We got to go here. Let's see, an ignition misfire or air fuel mixture. Wait a minute, I missed an 11. Which steps to be performed first when diagnosing an engine performance problem? When you're diagnosing it, closest thing I can get is the thorough visual inspection. Actually, before that, you're supposed to have verified the concern if you could. Listen to this though. Let me tell you this. If it's an intermittent problem, if it's something that only happens sometimes, if they say when I'm turning left, it bucks and jerks, and then it doesn't do that any other time, except when I'm pulling a hill or turning left. Verify the concern, but when you go out there and start looking around, don't pull on stuff and move things, because you may move a wire harness away from a sharp edge where it's scratched through, and you fix it inadvertently, and then it'll work its way back over there and it comes back on you. Look with your flashlight without touching anything first, and see if you see a wire harness dragged across a sharp bracket or something, or laying on an exhaust manifold, or believe it or not, laying on the round tube of a suction line coming out of an evaporator. If a wire harness rubs on that, it'll actually rub into that wire harness and get it. You'll see copper. You know, if you pull the wires back and you see shiny copper, you know you found your problem. You know, you got to fix the wire and all that stuff. Sometimes it's just as simple as taping it up and tying it back with a tie wrap. There was a guy that came to me one time, and I don't know how he wound up talking to me without one of the. Well, he went to the write-up area, but he talked to me too, and he says, "My van has been cutting up and bucking and jumping, and I didn't want to bring it to the Ford place because I was afraid I'd get overcharged. So I went to every shop in town, and I've spent $725, and my van is still running just like it did. And everybody I take it to charges me a bunch of money and changes parts." And he says, "I don't know what's wrong with it, but it's driving me crazy. I gotta have this thing fixed, and it's emptying my checking account." And so I went out there and looked at it, and pulled the code, popped the engine cover off, and there was a wire harness dragging across a bracket. And I tied it back, taped it up, charged him $20. Because they didn't do a visual inspection. They were assuming it was a part. You know what I mean? I like to try to find out what's wrong before I throw a part at it. You know what I mean? If I do throw a part at it, it's going to be one that doesn't cost that much. And hopefully it's one I can send back if I need it. But typically I'm going to do as much as I can toward finding out what's wrong before I change any parts. And it didn't cost anything to pull that bracket, pull that wire back, see the copper where it had been scratching against that, and tape it up. See, I mean, it's just obvious stuff, you know, just a lot of stuff's common sense stuff. If you just think about it, you know, just think about it, look at it, look down there what you see what you see that's rubbing against whatever else, you know, it ain't really all that big of a deal. Now, me and Adam, you know, fooling with his navigator, trying to make sure we did that, it took some heavy duty moving the stuff around, looking through a little bitty hole and all that sort of stuff to find it. Let me see here. Ignition misfire or air fuel mixture problem is an example of what kind of diagnostic trouble code? That's a type A. A type A is one that's really important and needs to be handled. Okay? Got it? In other words, the reason it's a trouble code that could damage the catalytic converter, and you know how long the catalytic converters typically, you know, the last ones I looked at, 80,000 miles, I think is what they guarantee the catalytic converter and engine controller for and all that sort of stuff. But if they damage the catalytic converter because of a misfire, you know, they're calling that a type A. Technician A says check coolant level in the radiator when it's hot. Technician B says check coolant level in the radiator when it's cool. That's a sort of a duh. You're basically going to squeeze your top hose and see if it's got pressure on it. If there's a lot of pressure on that top hose, don't take it off. There you go. Let me see. That last step in the diagnosis process is which one? We've hammering on that one. Verify the repair. Type A and B diagnostic trouble codes are related to what?
Safety.
Basically, they're related to emissions. And the check engine light is going to be an emission-related thing too. You know, some diagnostic trouble codes require a certain number of trips before they'll set a code and turn off the MIL. A type A code will set it on the first trip. If it's a type A code, it'll set it on the first trip. But I will tell you too.
You said it was C.
Huh?
You said you skipped 14, but you didn't verify the repair.
Yeah, verify the repair. That one we sort of went past it quick, but it was a no-brainer. Using the scan tool to clear a trouble code will also erase what?
Freeze frame data.
Freeze frame data will be erased by that too. Engine spark should be checked using what?
Spark tester.
Yeah, spark plug tester. or a spark tester. Now sometimes I use a pocket screwdriver. You're using a spark tester, you want to control the amount that it jumps and keep it steady. Technically is what they do. Sometimes I'll start out checking it slow and I'll try to see if I can stretch it a little bit to make sure it's good and strong. You can, by the way, if you use a spark tester the right way, even if you don't have any other tools, you can find a weak ignition coil on one of these coil-on plug Fords like that. By checking to see, set it on about, I'm going to say 3/4 to 7/8 of an inch, and turn the coil upside down, ground the spark tester, put it in there and let it jump. Spin it over, let it go pop, 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 pop. If it won't pop and jump that long spark, then you found your bad coil. You just got to go from one coil to the next. What would be really cool is if you had 8 spark testers and you could hook them all up at the same time and you could spin it over, you'd know right away, wouldn't you? Be a lot of setup time on that, but it'd work. Let me see, vehicles being checked with a scan tool after sitting in the shop overnight, key on, engine off. Technician A says the intake air temperature and engine coolant sensor will read the same temperature. Technician B says these 2 sensors will read differently. Now that's what I was talking about earlier, that's A. They should read about the same. And we got this one more question. Technician A says, when using a scan tool, the year of the vehicle is not important as long as the correct make and model are used. Technician B says using the wrong year with a scan tool may result in incorrect data, and that is B. Incidentally, if you're talking to a GM car, if you're fooling with a GM car and you put the wrong vehicle in there, a lot of times on a GM car you won't get nothing for scan data. It can't even talk to the car. It sort of swells up like a possum.